There is more than one way to equity inside a business. Nigel Beach was employee number around about 20 in Compac sorting equipment.
Yeah, well, I guess I stayed for so long because we kept just growing, and every time I turned around, I was running a bigger team or doing something different, or it just kept it being interesting and getting bigger and bigger.
Like most New Zealand businesses that succeed at exporting, they come across a different scale of opportunities, but the sheer volume of things that they were doing at Compac sorting often became astounding.
And, the biggest machine we did was basically the size of a rugby field, processed like 50 million mandarins a day.
Persistence certainly pays, and for Nigel, it was being turned away many times for the opportunity of becoming a significant shareholder that spurred him on.
And I just kept pestering them. And I was really the only one who got a shareholding, and actually had to buy. I bought my shareholding. I borrowed some money and bought it.
Fundraising was not de jour in the day of Compac, and yet they reached an astounding revenue number.
Funny business in the fact that we got to 150 million with basically no money put in.
Yeah, that was bootstrapped essentially, wasn't it?
Bootstrapped all the way, except near the end, which is a whole story in itself, where we put in 10 million because we sold the factory that we had.
Earnouts, however, can be risky, and things didn't go entirely the way the team had planned when it came to this piece of the puzzle.
So then it turned out, instead of our forecast being like, you're going to make 10 million, it was then they realized they had lost track. And so we go to this meeting, and they write on the board, I would like to buy your company.
Nigel Beach, 25 years of relationship. Finally, we get to sit down in the studio together. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So you've spent now the best part of 30 years in the automated fruit sorting industry. Was that based upon a childhood job that you had to do? You were tasked with sorting a whole bunch of fruit out and you hated it so much that you decided to dedicate your career to liberating people from that job, or something different?
I think it was something different. Probably a couple of reasons. One is my dad was an engineer and he worked a lot on dairy plants, and I had summer jobs helping him with like engineering and stuff like that. So I was exposed a lot to that kind of automation and dairy plant. And when I went for a job interview at Compac, which was actually my first job interview after university, I saw they were doing machine vision for sorting of fruit. I thought, that's really interesting. I'd really like to get into that. So I thought, get into that. That's interesting. Yeah.
So without aging you, that's got to be kind of, around about 3 decades, give or take, ago that you got that first job. And so you essentially chose the industry that you would work in, either consciously or subconsciously, straight out of university.
Yeah.
It's a remarkable kind of path to have taken.
Yeah, well, I guess I stayed for so long because we kept just growing, and every time I turned around, I was running a bigger team or doing something different, or it just kept it being interesting and getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
So, and right at the end, and we'll get to that when we talk about the sale, but right at the end, I had a job lined up at Amazon, and I had it in front of me, and this was in Japan, living in Japan at the time. And Hamish, the founder, rang me and said, we're going to sell. And I thought, I might as well stick it out to the end. I thought it'd be 6 months. It was a year, the most intense year ever. Yeah.
That's a sliding door moment. And so that would have been 2014, 2015, that offer from Amazon. And I remember us talking about that offer from Amazon.
Yeah.
So looking back upon that decision now, do you think it was the right one?
I think for the learnings, because it was an incredible experience to go through selling the company. I certainly learned a huge amount, a very intense amount of work, the most I've ever worked. But just the learnings from that was really interesting and good to see it to the end. It was kind of like closing a chapter.
Yeah. So you mentioned Hamish Kennedy, the founder. You weren't one of the original founders, but you're a significant shareholder in the company when it was sold. But let's talk about that starting point. So you studied science at university, Bachelor of Science, or was it engineering?
It was this one they had at Waikato, a 4-year one, computer science and maths.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I studied that at university, and when I finished, this was in Hamilton at Waikato, I thought I'll move to Auckland. There's more opportunity there. I wasn't quite as smart as the guy sitting next to me in the lab working on his PhD, Craig Neville Manning, who went to Stanford and after doing his PhD and met up with Larry and Sergey and they were doing this thing called, search engine, Google. Really? You've met him.
Yeah,
met him,
I have met him, yes.
Yeah. He did a lot better than me to go there.
Yes.
I became very rich out of that. But I went to Auckland instead and talked to found a recruitment agent, Barry O'Brien, that you know. And he told me about this company in Onehunga. So I went for an interview and they were doing that machine vision that I saw and doing these interesting machines. So I thought, I'll take a job. Yeah. Take a job there. The first interviews. I really only had one interview, worked for right from 1996 to 2017.
Yeah, wow.
Before I actually finished a job either. So I'd never gone through that experience of finishing a job or being fired or laid off.
And maybe you will never get to do that, and hopefully not.
I have since.
You have since. Okay. Yeah. I think that the numbers are 1.7 times in a person's career you will go through a redundancy process. Some people will experience it many times and others not at all, thus the 1.7. But I think that it's actually a good experience to have because it gives you perspective on sometimes it's not you, it's the company. Very rarely is it you, it's the company. Companies have different needs at different phases. And so, shedding a bit of a skin and kind of moving on to the next phase means that you have to rebuild in different ways. And so I actually don't think it's a terrible experience unless you choose to make it so. So not you individuals as people.
Yeah.
So those early days for you of Compac, what did the company look like? What scale was the business? Which markets were they operating in?
I remember being about maybe 30 people, 5 million turnover. And I knew because I kind of used to just go and ask them, which is kind of unusual for a graduate, just go in.
Especially an engineering graduate.
Yeah.
Science graduate.
Yeah. About 30 people. They were selling New Zealand, Australia, but they had machines in France, I seem to remember. They had a kiwi fruit grower in France who loved the rugby, and he came over to see the All Blacks, and then he saw, toured some kiwi fruit sites and saw these machines and thought, I could buy one of those. So, of course, Hamish didn't have any fear about anything, so he thought, we'll just sell one to France. What could go wrong? And so they had some machines in France, and I think they had a few in the USA, not many.
Yes.
Mainly New Zealand, kiwi fruit apples. And when I started, they had just kind of invented a new kind of carrier for sorting the fruit, for holding the fruit, and got a patent on it. And it was better than the competition. It was more gentle because it could tip to two different sides, hold a fruit, and you could tip it either left or right. So if you had an apple in it, you could tip one to the right and the next one to the left so they don't collide and get a bruise. And it was also quite integrated that it could rotate the fruit for inspection and then sort them. So it's kind of better than the competition. So that was good. But what I noticed was they had this vision software that was kind of crappy. It kind of did a job, but it had lots of problems. Like you'd press a key on the interface to change something and all the fruit would go off the end of the machine while you were typing, or it was just impossible to set up for the technician or the customer. So I was there. When I first started, I didn't work on that. When I first started, they had me working on their main software for the sorter, and they were trying to write new stuff because their stuff was old, and they had it on two computers, and computers at that time were expensive, like $4,000, and they were trying to rewrite it from scratch. And at some point, I saw that they'd said, we can't port this DOS stuff to Windows. We're going to have to rewrite it all. And I thought to myself, I think I could.
Hi, it's Josh. Thanks for listening to the show. When founders talk about the dream exit, they're really talking about freedom. Freedom to choose how to use their time and to decide what comes next. As a client of JB Ware in New Zealand, I know this is what sets them apart. They help entrepreneurs and leaders turn success into significance. A great exit isn't just about the commas in your bank account. It's about what those commas allow you to create. Two Commas is proudly partnered with JB Ware, helping founders by putting their wealth to work for generations.
So I went home every night for like 2 weeks and ported their stuff to Windows and came back and said, look, I've done it. And they were really surprised because it basically saved my whole salary or twice my salary in a couple of weeks. And that got them onto a new footing. So they kind of liked me after that. And then after a year, they said, "Oh, why don't you redesign this vision software because it's got all these problems?" And we've got this other Israeli guy, Gadi, who was had worked on machine vision kind of stuff before, so he kind of knew all the algorithms, but he didn't really know how to structure software. And I could seemingly structure some software, seemed to have a knack. And so we wrote a new version of that. It took about 9 months, I remember, to get the first version out. And we put it at a couple of sites in New Zealand because we already had customers, so we upgraded them, processing some tomatoes. And then I remember they said after we had it running for a few weeks, "Oh, we're going to put it in France because it's not working very well." And so we put it over there, and it kind of, other side of the world. In the days we didn't really have the connectivity, and seemed to work really well. And I remember downloading the logs and looking at stuff. "Oh, how did it go today? Oh, I processed 1 million tomatoes. I really never thought about that before. My software just goes off and processes 1 million tomatoes correctly." And that was a good experience. And it kind of helped at that point. And we kind of grew quite quickly, 6 million to 10 million over a couple of years, because that software was easier to install and get working and for the customers to use. So they didn't have to send a technician and babysit it and stuff. So that helped them grow a bit. And then...
Just fill in a gap if I can, while you're catching up on your thoughts there. So I launched into it and you continued the thread. Let's go back to the problem that's being solved here, because this is a relatively niche industry from a New Zealand context that actually we've got some quite world-leading companies that have come from here, as I understand. But once you scale up and you go into the very large, crop growing nations and regions, it becomes a massive, massive problem. So what's the problem that's being solved for, and how is that solved through the technology, through Compac sorting?
Yeah, basically what Compac was doing was making these sorters to initially sort by weight to put the fruit into different sizes. Because before that, they either had a row of people holding a sample like tomato and picking off the right sized one off a bout, or they had some various different mechanical ways to do it. And this is kind of electronic sorting. There was some, competition at the time doing it, but Hamish, his parents had a kiwifruit orchard, so he basically built one for them. He'd studied electronics and computers at university. So these sorters were doing weight and then got into color grading and then ultimately defect grading, because you had to sort the quality of the fruit, really. And that's the ultimate thing. And then ultimately we got into full complete lines, because that's what a customer wants. Give me a line that dumps my bins of fruit and sorts it all out and then packs it into boxes or bins or bags or whatever.
Yeah, great. So the alternative is that there's a bunch of humans that are standing there trusting their eyes to look at the fruit or the product and then kind of pick it and then put it into appropriate places, which not only is kind of mind-numbing work for someone to do, probably quite stressful as well, I would imagine. But also, what's the difference in the early days of the accuracy rate of the machine versus the human, and what would the accuracy rate now be of the machine versus if a human was still to do it somewhere?
Now it's better than the people, or the same. So you basically get rid of all the people sorting the fruit. In the beginning, it was certainly better at sizing and better at doing the color, but the defect took us a long time. It took, to get to that level, you don't need any people. It took 20 years. We thought it would take a couple.
Yes.
And it took us really 20 years to get it to that level.
Why?
It is surprisingly a really, really difficult problem to emulate what people can do really easily. If
I think about the combination of things that are present in that you've got to get right to get that solution working effectively. Software, obviously. You've got hardware, so, SCADA control systems, actual mechanized things, the machines that process the line. You've got data, because you have to have like a data set and then a comparison set. You've got machine vision.
Yeah.
And each of those things are complex.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're building, imagine if we just go right back to software, for example, and I've had a lot of people on the show that have built amazing software companies. And I don't know, Mike Carden, Sonar 6, remains a good friend, and he wouldn't mind me saying this, they were solving how do we build a piece of software that sits in the cloud in the early days that people will log on to. It gives them a good experience and they can tell us how they feel about the company and how they feel about themselves. You're solving the software problem. None of these other problems as well. So, and have I missed anything there in terms of the problems that you're having to solve for and get right and get them working in unison effectively?
No, that's correct. And we were good at those different areas. Good at mechanical design. And Hamish, surprisingly, was good, even though he'd studied electronics at university. And we had another shareholder, Gavin, who was quite good at the electronics, so we were good at designing that. We had our own electronics for a long time because in those early days there wasn't really anything suitable for the high-speed weighing and the high-speed activation of solenoids. And then we're just good at getting the software to work with all that and be really reliable and high-speed.
Yes.
And, the biggest machine we did was basically the size of a rugby field, processed like 50 million mandarins a day. This was in California.
50 million a day?
Yeah.
That's just mind-boggling.
70 computers that all had to be coordinated.
Wow.
2,000 solenoids all had to activate in the right times. Yeah.
Wow, that scale is just remarkable. And by the way, that was just me talking about the technical problems that you've got to solve to make the thing work properly. Yeah. And you've got to overlay all of the standard business problems, which is human resources, marketing, sales, product to market, supply chain. This is a really complex business, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we ended up expanding around the world and having offices and factories in different countries. But how we did that wasn't necessarily always that organized or planned. So we had...
Oh, it wasn't a symphony every single time and it went just clockwork and amazing.
No, often it was we were quite big in South America because there was a guy from Uruguay coming to do his OE and he was working on the factory floor, and this is typical of Compac. So we got on the factory floor and then he got talking to Hamish. Turns out he had a master's in engineering and he was really kind of smart guy, and so we got him selling back into South America, and then we got him to move back there and set up a factory, become a shareholder, so he had a bit of a shareholding, and so we ended up doing, I don't know, 10 million US in South America or something, 10 million US from that, but not really. I mean, we knew we wanted to go there, but sometimes you needed to have the right person.
Yeah.
The right person sometimes came from internal. We were big on internal people.
Yes.
Them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I kind of think, there's a couple of ways that you can achieve great things. Have a really, really structured plan and methodically execute upon that plan. Or you can have some intentions to go about achieving some things and then create the right environment for those things to happen, such as hiring people that are non-native New Zealanders who might just naturally have different networks and different skills to bring to the table. And then things can, magically happen for you. It's the whole kind of secret, the book, The Secret kind of mentality. And those things are not binary. You can do a mix of those two things together, by the way. But sitting there hoping that someone might help you grow your company will not get you there. But, kind of making some steps, doing some experiments to get there kind of will.
Yeah.
So 21 years into your time there, the company was sold, but you ended up as a shareholder along the way because you were a employee fresh out of university.
Yeah.
How far into that journey did that opportunity get broached with you, and how? Did you ask Hamish or did he mention it to you? Talk us through the getting into shareholding.
8 years, I think. Yep. And I just kept pestering them. And I was really the only one who got a shareholding, and actually had to I bought my shareholding. I borrowed some money and bought it.
That's right.
And that was the only way. And I was really the only one until maybe a couple of people later on.
Yeah. So you started with about a $5 million turnover. You mentioned it grew quite quickly in a couple of years. Do you recall the scale that the business was at when you purchased your shareholding?
It was 20. So it had kind of been growing, but not that quickly. We kind of averaged 15% over a long period of time. Yeah.
Right.
20.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was 2004.
Yes.
And then we sold as 150 million.
Yeah, wow.
And there was a period where we were growing like 50% a year when we were big.
Yes.
50 million to 75 and then 75 to 120.
Yeah, wow.
Which is kind of in some ways bad because it was difficult to scale and keep the wheels from falling off and keep profitability because it is quite a intensive business about lots of stuff you're manufacturing and lots of complex projects and
capital intensive, I would imagine, as well.
Capital intensive, yeah.
Yes.
The cash flow kind of issues. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So 20 million of revenue. Was it, and you mentioned sometimes it impacted profitability, as much as you can share and recall, because 2004 is quite a long time ago now, but was the business quite profitable at the time that you bought in? And was that one of the metrics that you used to calculate what the valuation should be?
Yeah, was. I can't remember, maybe 8% or 10%.
Okay.
It always was around that kind of 7 to 10%. It was never high. We kind of, Hamish liked to invest in more R&D.
Yes.
So the R&D team kept getting bigger, the engineering team, to try and grow the size of the business. And it's a funny business in the fact that we got to 150 million with basically no money put in.
Yeah, that was bootstrapped essentially, wasn't it?
Bootstrapped all the way, except near the end, which is a whole story in itself, where we put in 10 million because we sold the factory that we had.
Right.
Because we actually had bought it early on.
Oh, and only hung, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But separately, which is the shareholder separately from the shareholding in the main company, something I always advise because you don't get the right multiple if a building is part of a business. And we had it separately, which is funny. At the time, the bank said, "Oh, don't do that. That'll be terrible." But it actually worked in our favor a lot later on when we needed financing from the bank. We just said, "Oh, can we secure it against the building? The thing you told us not to do." But now it's gone up in value, and we need some, credit.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I'll pause on that and explain it clearly for people that didn't pick that up. If you are interested in buying an asset, like a capital asset for your business, such as real estate, the thing that your business is domiciled in, and that was the way that I first got into commercial real estate. I bought a office space for my business and then bought the neighbouring space and then ended up with a floor and then went out and bought a whole lot of industrial assets over time as I was able to borrow against that ever-appreciating portfolio. And the sensible or the common sense approach that people will suggest to you, and I do the same thing, is to go set up a separate limited liability company, have whatever shareholders you want in that, have a structured lease agreement back to the tenant, which is the operating company, the OpCo, and then ratchet that by 1 to 2%, depending on where you're at, per annum. Ratchet means that it can't go down, it can only go up. Have as long a lease duration in place as you comfortably can. Tenant looks after all the operating expenses, and then you have a separate asset as shareholders that is appreciating separately to the business. And what you've mentioned there, Nigel, is absolutely true. That asset is very difficult to value as a part of the company assets, which is cash flow, stock on hand, EBIT, the multiple on EBIT, all those sorts of things. Growth, and so this thing over here will often be undervalued. But interestingly, and there's always ways that you can hack the rules of business, and so you guys hacked it because it was owned by the company, and that became a helpful thing later on. Is that correct?
No, it was separate. It was
okay.
a separate company for those reasons you said.
Yes.
We could still, because sometimes the banks will want to, guarantee from the shareholders. And
yes.
Well, the shareholders own this building and this company that we're in, so let's just guarantee against that.
Yes.
That we need to have more debt. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. And so you ended up with a reasonably good chunk of the company that when you bought in?
No, I had 5%.
5%. Yeah.
But it was enough to be really involved and be on the board.
Yes.
Which was valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And to produce some money in the end.
Yes.
But not as much as I wanted because things went a bit south at the end.
Yeah, let's get to that.
Yeah.
So 5% of a company that ultimately was turning over $150 million is not insignificant.
Yeah.
How did you fund the purchase price? Because if I do some rough back of the napkin mathematics, 20 million, 8% profit, let's call it $1.6 million. So, you're probably going to do an EBIT multiple. I'm going to guess it was, 5 to 10, something in that sort of region. Might have been less than that. Still a reasonable amount of money that you've got to get your hands on. And you're a 28-year-old to a 30-year-old guy.
Yeah.
Starting to have a family, probably a lot of resources. How did you fund it?
It was $300K actually.
Okay.
And so you're probably pretty close on your guess. And it was partly because I bought a house in Onehunga the year before. But also my dad helped me out because he had some property.
Right.
Some property he bought at the beach in 1970 for $5,000, and it appreciated a lot. And he bought it. This farmer decided to subdivide. It is a funny story because the farmer decided to subdivide, and they decided they would do the mortgages themselves, but it was at a fixed interest rate instead of the bank. And so my dad bought it like 1970, and then they had the oil shock. Inflation went to 20%. He said it was just like paid it off years later, and So we had that, and it was worth a lot more. So we agreed to guarantee the mortgage, the loan I needed,
Right.
300.
Got it.
But then we weren't really getting dividends from Compac, so I just I had to work hard to pay that. But also at the same time, maybe a little bit before I bought in there, I've always been interested in business. So when I was at uni, I had a company with my friend selling computers, which taught me a lot, that it's like a low margin, high volume game. It's kind of fun to do. And then when I was at Compac, I had an employee and he kept going on about his brother was making $300,000 a year from shareware and he travels around the world and works on it. I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. Why don't I make something? So there was another guy I knew. We made some software, and it was to fix a problem, which we knew would eventually get fixed by Microsoft, but you'd print stuff from the internet and it would get cut off on one side.
Right.
So we just made something to plug into Internet Explorer, and I think we sold about 50,000 US or something, which wasn't bad for... and it
A few
took...
weeks' work.
Yeah, it wasn't a huge amount of work, and but it taught me a lot about marketing. So it also helped fund some of this loan, pay some of it. But it also taught me a lot about business and marketing because I had to do all the Google ads. I learned things like I'd get all these tech support emails. So I made a tech support page saying, you can contact me here, but here's put the 5 common questions that people had, and then all the tech support emails go down. It's like simple systems to get rid of noise. But I also found that I made most of my money by, instead of selling individual licenses, I would sell these company-wide ones. I'd pay $400 and you can buy it for your whole company to fix that problem. Or you can pay $4,000 and buy it for your whole enterprise, and then people would. And I didn't, it's a big world, so I didn't care that they were doing however many users. I didn't mind. Rather than a $25, which was funny at the time, you could sell it for like $25 shareware, which you couldn't do now. So that was one thing that helped, but it was a struggle too.
Yeah.
Honest for a while.
Yeah. We'll come back to the multiple later when we get to the actual exit of the company, because it'd be good to tie it back to what you saw as an increase on your money, but let's not talk about that just yet. I'd like to talk through the middle patch. So you bought in 8 years into the company. Yeah. You were getting into some international markets. You mentioned France, you mentioned USA, you mentioned South and Central America as well. But what was some of the, and your role, I presume, continued to evolve over time? You started as a software engineer, but then you kind of continued to progress up through the ranks. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what were some of those key inflection points for Compac as they went? You mentioned nearly breaking as we went through growth. So talk us through a couple of those.
There's some good growth stories, like probably 98, 99. I'd been there a little while. We had that new vision software. We were trying to do more in America, and we were trying to get this really good distributor in Washington State, because there's about 60% of the apples are grown in Washington State. And we couldn't really get them to come with us, this company Van Doren, because they were with our competition. So we got a local agent to help us sell, but we just started sending our own salespeople and sold a couple of machines and, sent our own salespeople, sent our own technicians, kind of just get into the market ourselves. But we also came up with a clever idea, which was, let's take our software and electronics and do a brain transplant on existing machines that are there, because it was existing sorting machines and they were mechanically quite good, but the software and electronics was behind, and the company that was supplying them hadn't really advanced that software and electronics. And these brain transplants were high margin, so we started doing those. We did the first couple. They didn't really work because no one had asked me about whether it would be a good idea. So they sent me there to fix it, and I spent a lot of time. And this happened to me a number of times in these trips. Work really hard, long hours with the customer, couldn't figure it out, have a really good sleep in on a Sunday, go there. Oh, I see what the problem is. Fix it or make it work. And it started working really well. And it was better color grading. It was just color grading at the time. Weight. The weight was better. And then it helped us get these sales. And then what happened was this company Van Doren found that their sales were disappearing. So then they jumped ship to us as the as our distributor. And they were really good because they were quite a reasonably sized company that was making the whole turnkey line. So a customer would go to them and say, give me the whole line for fruit, and they would supply all the equipment except the sorter, which they didn't have. They would sell ours, which was the higher margin thing. So that was one way we expanded.
While you're thinking of the next one, I'll just break that down because there's a innate flexibility that Compac presented with there, as opposed to saying, we are the best at everything and we're going to sell you the full turnkey solution. We're actually flexible. We can work with what's there.
Yeah.
It's an expression that I really like, rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which is a classic cliche. Identify the opportunity that you may have to be able to play and win within. Can we win within the space? And you clearly had a leading piece of software. So the flexibility was to go, well, why don't we just license the software, essentially, and then port it into other people's hardware, so that it means that the customer doesn't have to go through a process of throwing everything out, but they can rather just use our software. So ergo, we get the opportunity to create some revenue that might not have existed otherwise. So attachment to the outcome, but flexibility on how you get that outcome is what I'm hearing that to be.
Yeah, we had a lot. We had different paths to market, just depending on really what was available and what were the conditions. So we had that distributor in Washington State, but we set up our sales in California in an office. And then in some markets, there was other people to make the rest of the turnkey. But eventually, like in places like South America and Europe, we got into doing the complete lines ourselves, because there wasn't necessarily great suppliers, because the competition had kind of evolved. They'd started off doing that kind of fruit equipment, and they'd kind of done that equipment and the sorter. So they had the whole lines. So really, when you went to look at who you could buy the rest of the equipment from, it was really your competition who didn't want to sell it. They would go in partners with you with the customer. They were like, we're going to sell our sorter as well as all that other equipment. So we were kind of forced into that in a certain number of markets, except a few places like the US where there was more competition. But another way we grew was in how we got into California. So again, because there was a citrus customer who had frost damage with their fruit. And what happens when you get a frost in California is the fruit can get damaged, and then it will dehydrate and the water will leak out. Yep. And so if you ever cut into an orange and it's dry on the inside, that's the reason of frost damage.
Okay.
And they do crazy things to try and stop it, like hover helicopters over to break up the air and stuff.
Yes.
We had found with our machine that it was quite accurate at its weighing and very accurate on its vision to work out the volume. And you put those together, you can get the density. And therefore, you can work out if it's gone dry on the inside, because the density will be different.
Okay.
And then we had a customer who had a big problem with the frost, and they said, well, we need your machine to sort it out. So we air freighted one to him, which I can't remember how much it cost, but it solved all his problems. And then he was quite key in the industry. So they helped our reputation over there.
Yeah, well.
So they helped us starting to grow in the USA. Mm-hmm. Taking an opportunity like that, which you think is a bit crazy. And then we had some other technology we developed. We were quite innovative. There was some technology that Plant and Food had worked on, and other people in the world had worked on, but not really commercialized it, to work out the sweetness of fruit without any contact with the fruit. And you can basically shine a really bright light on fruit, and some of the chemical bonds will absorb some wavelengths, reflect some, and you can measure that reflection and do some complicated modeling and work out the sweetness. So we'd made a machine for that. And it wasn't really completely that successful, because the problem with sorting fruit for sweetness was that the customers really didn't know what to do with it. They didn't really have a market for sweet fruit. They were kind of paid on color and size, and it had to meet a minimum. And then they had to kind of develop two markets. It was a bit more successful in America, where they're more competitive and they could find opportunities in different supermarket chains to supply that to. But then, and I think this is a kind of a key lesson about products, you kind of really got to work with customers deeply to kind of find out what their problems were. And you don't always hear about their problems because you're in one area of their business and their problems somewhere else. And they had this problem that we hadn't really seen. They had this problem that like apples get brown on the inside. And if they have more than 5%, that apples that are brown on the inside, you have to chuck away the whole crop. You can't sell it. And you can't really sort them out because you can't see it. And we'd never really seen that because they kind of chuck that away before it comes to our machine, so we'd never really talked to them. And you kind of dig around, you find out they've got that problem. So we figured out how to change the machine to, shine a really bright light inside the fruit, and you could measure that brown. And then you realize that was worth a lot more to them because they could recover, like 80% of the crop. Even if you could get rid of that 5%, even if you had to throw away another 15% because it wasn't completely that accurate, you still recovered 80%. It was worth a lot.
Yeah.
So we did that. And then an interesting lesson from that was, especially from Hamish, he's quite cunning like this. He's like, well, no one else has got this technology. And okay, they want to buy it, but I'm just going to lease it because I haven't really got any choice. And he managed to make the pricing such that the lease payment in the first year paid for the equipment. So then it was just really cash after that, and you had to spend some money modeling and supporting it. But it was a great part of the business. It was a little bit separate, actually. I didn't own a bit initially. It got folded in later because just before I bought in, had an argument with the other shareholder, and he didn't want to be part of that, so they'd spun it out separately. So the cash cow bit was a bit separate, but it was a cunning kind of business idea. You used them to lease it, and what are they going to do?
Yeah, and I'll contextualize that because I think you're talking about the 1990s at this stage, maybe early noughties.
Late, yeah.
Yeah, and so that was pre-SaaS, right? So in those days, you bought software.
Yeah.
You didn't essentially, because SaaS is kind of a lease model, right?
Yeah.
And so you didn't lease it at all. SaaS became a thing in late noughties, but really it wasn't until like 11, 12, 13 that people started to cotton on to the fact that the business model makes sense for the founders and the funders of the software company. But also as a user, you get the flexibility around it. Enterprise software is a little bit different because you have to change your business to suit the software, and so you're not going to chop and change with it. But just scratching on that for a second, this is an interesting kind of lesson to take away. I think the assumption that a lot of people in business can make is that, and I talk about this all the time, we have found the root problem that we are able to solve for. Worst case scenario is you find an adjacent problem and you're essentially dealing with a symptom, not the core problem. But let's say you've been able to find the root for problem that you're solving for. So you're taking that innate pain away from your customer. What I've heard you say is that Hamish continued to look for adjacent problems or other things that you could do with the solutions that you had. So continue to ask the question, what else could we apply this to? What else could we build that would solve other problems on behalf of our existing customer set? And then as a consequence, expand the revenue line based upon being able to do more within the same and additional customers, which is a really smart way to operate.
Yeah, being able to sell more to the same customers is easier. Yeah. They're trying to acquire new ones. That was one way we expanded. We also expanded the kind of fruit types we did because they were generally worked on the same machine, but you had to work on the blemish technology. It was different and maybe had some different handling challenges. Cherries was the only one that was reasonably different. That took a different design machine, but that was also a good market. But there was another interesting story about how we expanded is that we did develop this blemish technology. It did take us a long time. We had some researchers and they kind of worked for a year really hard and they made this breakthrough. They tried all these different things and they managed to make this breakthrough to how to identify the defects because you really couldn't do it with color because the color would get confused with things that weren't defects. So they made us a good algorithm. So we had kind of made this defect grader, but it wasn't good enough that it could get rid of all the people before the sorter because the people would sort out the fruit before the sorter. And then the problem is if you couldn't get rid of all the people, then how could you turn on the defect grader because it's looking after the people? And we thought we had to get it to a certain level. And then one day we realized, well, why don't we just sell them another machine to go before their sorting machine, another sorting machine, because we had found that we could do a good job of identifying perfectly good fruit and a good job of identifying, say, juice fruit. But then there was this middle ground we called suspect, where you need a person to look at it. And we realized, well, we sell them another sorter, they'll still reduce labor and get efficiencies. And they can reduce the amount of labor, but they don't have to reduce it 100%. And our machine doesn't have to work 100%.
Right.
And it's just a different way of looking at the product. That sometimes you just got to, I don't know, you just have that brainwave. You've got to work a lot with your customers and figure out, that will work for a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, brilliant. One thing that I always was astounded by when you were talking about going to visit customers and going into market was the scale of these operations.
Yeah.
and I've driven through the Central Valley on the west coast of the States, where Bakersfield is in the middle of it. I remember you talking about Bakersfield, and I stopped there to have lunch because I'm like, oh, Nigel comes here all the time. But tell us about some of the scale of the size of the farms, the numbers of trees that they would have, just the volume that's there, because it's astounding when you're in a market like New Zealand.
Yeah, I don't know the numbers so much anymore. I know there's something like 60% or 70% of the citrus is grown in that valley there because it's very protected by the weather. It's kind of surrounded by mountains, so it's very dry, and then they pipe in water from up north. And yeah, I remember that when I started at Compac, we were doing these machines for New Zealand and maybe 4 lanes, 8 lanes wide, and the lanes are 300 millimeters apart, so they're a couple of meters wide. And I remember going to America when we started working with Van Doren, and they took me to a machine from the competition, and it was 20 lanes wide, so it was like 10 meters. It was quite really large and really long. And I was like, wow, this is incredible. And then we were back there 2 years throwing it out and putting our machine in instead, which I was really surprised at how we managed to grow and get bigger. But then we got up to customers like Paramount Citrus, who bought, that 70 lanes. They bought 70 lanes just to pre-sort the fruit for defect and into different sizes, into bins, store them away, and then another 8 lines to pull them out again and pack them into bags as one of their many pack houses. So compared to New Zealand, where, they might have a little pack house and it's got 8-lane machine, they're huge scale.
Yeah, they refer to that area as the fruit bowl of the United States. And I can't recall the scale of it either, but I remember driving through it for about 7 hours, and all, as far as you could see in every direction, was fruit trees. Just astounding, the actual scale of it. And I think almonds are growing in that region as well, so some nuts as well as fruit. And it's a mix of stone fruit, seed fruit, and other bits and pieces too from memory.
Yeah,
astounding. So let's go and talk about the early stages of the deal, the acquisition for Compac happening. So company's growing well. There's inevitable growing challenges that you've got along the way. I'll actually quickly pick up on that piece where you injected $10 million into the business. So when was that, and why was that?
Well, let's talk about the selling story, because that's kind of part of it as to why. So, as I said, I didn't think Hamish would sell it. He thought he'd just keep it. He liked doing it. And that's all he'd ever done from university.
Oh, he started, wasn't he?
Yeah, he started in 1984. It's basically made one for his parents. And then, so I joined, 12 years later, when he had kind of grown it a bit. But then he did ring me. I'd moved to Japan with my wife, so the kids could go to school. And of years, and I was kind of working remotely but doing less. I wasn't running all the R&D at that point. I was doing some business development, and then I had the Amazon job, and he rang me and I said, I'll stick it out to the end. So we thought about listing, but the boil had gone off listing, and so we were kind of advised not to do it. I think maybe it would have been good, but people weren't getting the same money for listing. It kind of, so we did some shopping around for someone to buy us, and we found a private equity firm in the US that was really serious about buying us. And so we started going through that process, and during that time I'd go to board meetings and would look at our cash. I'd been to board meetings for 10 plus years at that point, and our cash should always had a certain pattern because we generally had more work because of the fruit seasons in the first half of our financial year and less in the second. So we always had a pile of cash ready built up, and then it would kind of dry down. And I remember saying, well, we don't have any cash, and they thought it was fine, and I thought that doesn't seem right. And it's my one regret that I didn't push it harder. I really pushed, and I didn't really feel it was my place. We had these other financial people and stuff, and I wasn't really a financial person. So then it turned out, instead of our forecast being like, you're going to make 10 million, it was then they realized they had lost track in this complicated project accounting that you do, because your stuff spread over 6 months, 9 months, a year, and you have to apportion costs and then revenue over time. So suddenly it was like, actually going to make negative 2 million, and we need some cash.
I love that expression, make negative 2 million. We're going to lose $2 million.
Yeah, and we need cash because we've got a liquidity problem. So unfortunately, the timing was actually we'd sold the building maybe 6 months before that, and I got a bunch of cash and paid off my mortgage, and I was like, can you give us that cash? So we wanted to give our cash back and put it in. And that didn't really help our position where we were trying to sell. So we were doing all the diligence with this private equity firm. And Hamish is a good one at thinking ahead. So he had thought, well, we probably need a backup option. What's our backup option? Who can we talk to after this if it falls through? Because we put this 10 million in, but it still seems like we're not that profitable and we might, run out of cash, which turned out to be close to being the case. And so there was a company, Tomra, the one that eventually bought us. Their CEO had actually popped down to see us from Norway like about 6 months before or a year before. He was checking out the competition. He'd heard about, no, not the competition. He'd heard about us because Tomra was in French fry sorting and potato chip sorting and recycling sorting and all these things. And they were trying to get into more sorting, mining sorting as well. And they'd looked at the fruit sorting companies, and we weren't the biggest, although we were close to being number one in the world, probably. But he thought we were the best. So he'd been keeping, came to visit us, keeping an eye on us. So we had them kind of in the background. And then we went through all this due diligence with private equity, and it was going to be a good amount. And then just when it went to their final committee, they decided not to go ahead. I never really kind of figured out. One thing is I think they're worried about our profitability and the work. And it was a bit small for them, 150 million. They were kind of used to 500 million plus at USA firm. So that fell through. And then we were struggling a bit with profitability. And we had Tomra lined up. So we'd done a lot of due diligence work. So we had the stuff and we had Tomra. And then Hamish said to me, I'll come to this meeting because they're going to make us an offer. And but whatever you do, you have to react really neutral. You can't be happy about it.
Poker face.
Yeah, you got to be a poker face. He's great in negotiation. Hamish, I've learned so much from him about that kind of stuff. And so we go to this meeting, and they write on the board, I would like to buy your company for 300 million. And I just tried to be really quizzical. It was like, I bet there's a trick here. And of course there was. It was like, well, we're 300 million. This is going to be an earn out. It'll be 70 million now, and then there'll be 3 years, and you've got to do all these profit targets and hit these targets to get that kind of money. And we tried to push them up and get more. They weren't having it. These are the numbers that finally got published, right? So I worked intensely more on the diligence, and their diligence was worse than the other company. I think I worked a year in a 6-month time frame.
Wow.
Just intently learn a lot about what you should maybe think about and try and keep ready as you go with a business. Just simple things like they were concerned about, did you really own all the IP because you've had that software for 20 years, or all the people that you worked on, and did they sign up, you own the IP, and kind of things you don't really, stuff gets lost over time and you're not really clear about it. So I've got a big checklist of things, when you keep this tidy or that tidy as you go. So we did all that diligence.
So you had like a non-binding indicative offer letter, which was for that 300 million, 70 now, and then 230 paid in, pending on profits and probably growth of profits over time.
Yeah.
And you went off and did the due diligence for 6 months. Intense, nearly killed you. Relatively common story.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
Yeah, and I would say if you don't have someone free, because I was kind of free at the time because I've got someone else to run R&D. If you don't have people free, I don't know what you'll do. Hamish wasn't the CEO either, so it was an immense amount of work. So we spent ages on this 300-page sales contract and negotiating the points. And I remember that the day we were trying to sign up, we just all stayed up till 3 a.m. talking to their lawyers and just said, because we were trying to agree and we kind of had a deadline, we wanted to announce it the next day, and we just kind of had to agree on things that you could just never agree. It's good to have a deadline because there'll always be things you're arguing about. So then we agreed and we had to wait for OIO, so that took quite a while, I think. And then and there was a few things that happened in that deal that they really wanted to buy the sorter technology and the part of the company that made the sorters, but we had expanded the turnkey for those reasons I said before. So we ended up having these factories, like Uruguay and Spain, that could do the whole turnkey lines because we felt we needed them to compete. And I don't think Tomra's strategy is completely right because it is difficult to compete if you don't have this stuff. And I'm not sure they're still around and still doing reasonable. So they must have it. So we ended up keeping Spain. They just kind of carved it out. Oh, you can just have Spain. We don't, same money, but you keep Spain. But we didn't cover Uruguay at the time. So we made this deal, got the money, which was good.
70 million.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It was an earn out. And then what happened was they had to do you had to do a wash up. Okay, we've got the date, we'll give you some money, but then a few months later we'll finalise the accounts and check free cash and make adjustments. And they went and because this is kind of halfway through the financial year, and they did something that we had been warned about, because we had an advisor working for us, Michael Falconer, who used to work for Graham Hart. Actually, he's a really smart guy, and he's got a kind of investment company. And we had him as advisor, and he put in the contract, you have to do your accounting and the wash up the same as you're always doing it monthly, not to be a special one where you write off all this stuff, basically. But that's basically what they did. They went and dug through everything. Oh, that customer's not going to pay, and that stock's wrong, and this is, and now you owe us $10 million. Please give us $10 million back. I think they had some in escrow, so I was not getting that. So we started having a fight about that. And then we said, in the end, we thought, well, we're not going to get the earn out because we don't think the company's that profitable and the targets were quite high. So why don't we sign away that, and we won't give you back $10 million. You give us Uruguay for $1, and we'll have Uruguay and Spain, and we'll be your basically distributor over there, and we'll do the rest of the turnkey. So we'll sell these turnkeys and sell your machine. And that's basically what happened.
Right. Okay.
With carrying on, really. As I wasn't really involved for a while until later, carrying on.
Just going back a step to the deal, so the large chunk of the deal was on the table from an earn-out perspective, the 230-odd million. But it sounds like there was a range of things that happened that meant that was going to be unattainable, or did you achieve a portion of that and then you had to write the rest of it off? No,
because we made that deal soon after, because they were trying to claw back money. So before it really, and we didn't think we'd get anything in the first year, because it was before the first year financially, and then we didn't think we'd get the rest because it kind of the way it worked and stacked up. And you just thought, this is probably better, keep all the money that we've got.
Right.
And I think, I don't know what happened in the end, whether we would have got more, but we kind of felt it was a bit, why don't we just keep the money we've got? And I think for Hamish, it was quite a bit of money anyway, so.
Yes. He was
most of it.
Yeah, he was like
70% of it.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Right.
So I think, we decided that'd be easier. And we could have Uruguay and try and make some money out of that. Yeah,
great. So I can do the math. So that was kind of a 10x return on your money that you'd invested into the business, maybe a shade more than that, over around about a 10-year time frame.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, it's a really healthy return, but it's also into the significant level of return. Once you get into the millions of dollars of return, it starts to become, kind of moving the needle kind of thing. I reflect upon the angel investments that I've made and the early ones where, when 6 figures was sufficient, but over time you get to the stage where it really does have to be a good kind of chunky 7-figure number. And interestingly, I've been involved in a very large deal, New Zealand's largest ever angel return deal, of which I was a significant shareholder. And same situation where I still am receiving money today, down the path. And so it's a very large sum of money, and then it's quite a big sum of money, and that's still actually a reasonable sum of money just hit my bank account last week because of the retentions that have to happen over time. So they are a thing.
Yeah.
So the company, the shareholders retained the Spain, Uruguay kind of facilities. What did you do with those things over time? What happened with them, and what state are they in now? Have you kind of kept running them for a profit, or have you sold them? Or
yeah, well, that's the story. Let me digress a little bit into what happened after we sold. I did some consulting, and then one thing I'd like to talk about is I felt we were really good at recruitment. We were kind of tough, and we would say no to people if we had some doubts, and we were quite rigorous about recruitment. We tried to build really good people, and we used to test people as well, interview them, really test them. And I remember we had a CFO joined, and he interviewed, and the HR manager was telling me he interviewed accounts receivable, and he was going to hire them. Well, they said, they can do it, they've got this history. And she said, you should test them, see if they can actually do it. And he was like, I don't need to do that. And he tested them, and they couldn't do it. And you've got to be careful you don't hire someone who's selling you on what they could do, but I can't actually do it. And I also found if you test developers, you can kind of see how fast they are. I don't like slow people, they're actually quick at getting through stuff. So I
totally agree with you. I think that especially for salespeople, the trick when you're interviewing a salesperson is to make sure that the best selling performance that they do of their life is not the interview, because too frequently it is.
Yeah.
And so I haven't talked about this. There's a technique which is, I think, best in class. So I haven't developed a thorough methodology of my own. It's called top grading. And the essence of it is that you early on establish what the person's values are. Do you like the person? Do you have some chemistry? You can work with that person. And then you spend a half a day, which is a long time, literally going line by line through every single bit of their work history. Who did you work with? Who did you report to? How did you get your work? Who did you pass the work on to? Who verified the work? What was the quality of that work? Why did you leave? Were you promoted? What were you promoted for? What was your peers doing? Like, it's a real deep dive because there's no hiding.
Yeah.
Because you've got to talk through exactly everything that's happened in your work history. And so that's the thing that really, trajectory trend is a really, really hard thing for someone to buck. And so the things that they've done in their past, and then testing is super, super critical for people in technically oriented roles, whether using some form of tool, developing things, doing accounts payable, etc. And so it's really kind of hard for someone to sit there and say, oh, look, I've been a fuck up in the past, and that's pretty obvious, but I'm going to be a success here.
Yeah.
And so you're really wanting to understand, what were you like in the last 4 jobs that you've had?
Yeah. And I think maybe often dig into, people can talk about a project and all the great things, but really what was their role in that? Maybe that was just someone else's stuff. Our sales director had a different view. Had another technique for salespeople. He would take them on a day to visit lots of customers and let them, he said, if you spend a long time with them, their guard kind of comes down and you get to see what they're really like as a
great approach
as a person. So we're good at recruitment, and I had some relations with the university, and I rang them up one day. I said, have you got any good students? And they said, this guy Ken, he's like the top guy. So I gave Ken a job, Ken Moynihan. And after a couple of years, I thought, wow, he's better than me. But he's not better than me now because I've got more experience, but he's going to be better than me. And he did a lot on, say, the machine vision. But eventually, when we sold, he became the CEO of the pit that we sold, Compac. And then he was so good that he got promoted to run the 200 million euro part of Tomra in Europe for a while. So, but he brought me back to Tomra. So I came back for a bit, worked for a couple of years while we had this company on the side, Cians, which was their partner in these markets. And then because Ken got promoted to Europe, they had bought another company in Hamilton, BBC, blueberry sorting, a bit smaller. And they promoted that guy, Jeff Furness, to be the CEO. And it didn't really seem to like me. Maybe, I don't really know the reason why, history, or maybe he wanted to get his own guy in to run R&D. So he laid me off. And then he decided he didn't like the ex-Compac guys. He didn't want to be our partner. So he gave us notice, but he had to give us a year's notice. So we thought, we'll develop our own sorter. After this notice period ends, we'll go off and do our own sorter. So that was like 3 or 4 years ago. We got the same kind of team back together. Hamish designed another carrier. It was better. I got the software done, and now we're kind of competing with the old company. And not anywhere near as big. But,
yeah, so it's a classic case of let's get the band back together.
Yeah.
How's it going?
It's okay, but it's difficult to compete with something that took a huge amount of time and investment to engineer those solutions. So while we get sales, we're not anywhere near at the same scale.
Yeah.
But it's reasonable, surviving, I'd say.
What are the fundamental things, if any, that you are doing differently now with this business? Let's talk at a business level, and then we'll go to technology level second. So what are the fundamental things that you're doing differently now based upon the 30 years of experience you've amassed between starting at Compac sorting and today?
I don't think we're doing anything different, but what I did find is that you avoid the mistakes you made, especially when developing the product.
Got it.
Because you had to learn them the hard way often, and you can kind of avoid a bunch of them already. So it was quicker to develop the same machine The tools are better, so it's taken a little less kind of software development investment. Other than that, I don't always know if we have learned our lessons about some things, but trying to be a bit more focused, I think. Yeah, because I think at times at Compac we were a bit unfocused. Hamish was a classic entrepreneur, and I had to kind of try and rein him back at times, who wanted to develop anything and go after any opportunity. And I kind of found often that our profitability was more in some core areas, and if we spread ourselves too thin, we weren't really getting the return on those ideas. Yeah, so it was a tricky balance. Sometimes I think we spent too much on R&D at some point. We should have maybe got a bit more operationally better.
Right.
It's probably our weakness. But R&D's the kind of sexy thing that Hamish liked. Yeah,
it's funny. The narrative in New Zealand is that we underinvest in R&D, and you continue to see reports of where we, company-wise, as a percentage of revenue, we invest kind of 1.2%, I think, on average, is the latest number that I've seen. And then they always compare us to the Scandinavian countries, remarkably, who are, leading the field, and, German companies as well, that invest kind of 3 to 5% of company turnover in R&D. And so what's your view on that? And has that influenced now what you do with science?
Well, it's hard to afford to invest a lot in scenes. But at Compac, we were higher for a while, like 8%, and then it kind of dropped back as we got bigger to maybe more like the 5%. So it was a big key thing. And we still did the CNs, but Hamish has always been a do-it-yourself, so raising money isn't necessarily high on his list, so we're trying to do it ourselves again. But we have had Sunkus invest in us. So Sunkus is a shareholder now in CNs, which is good. Full in the USA because they quite a large company, represent a lot of citrus growers.
Yes.
They were actually making sorters themselves, but wanted to divest themselves of doing it and have us supply sorters to their customers, which is basically fruit citrus growers, and service their existing machines, which we're doing. Yeah.
So you've been working around machine vision for a very, very long time, and now with the advent of artificial intelligence, with the rapid evolution of AI, how would you compare what's available now that I presume you're using versus what you were using kind of 10, 15 years ago, and where do you think it might be going?
10, 15 years ago, we really had to invent the algorithms yourself and try and figure out an algorithm, and it was quite difficult, and it wasn't great at certain kinds of problems. But now you can train up some AI and it does a large part of the job. There's still complexities that you have to solve yourself that the AI is not necessarily solving, because there's a lot of complexity about taking multiple views of a fruit as it rotates and stitching it together and getting all that working. But actually identifying the defects, you can train some AI in it, and it does a reasonably good job.
Yeah.
Much simpler, with much less investment.
Yeah.
Because we couldn't use the same algorithms we used in the past that kind of belong to someone else. And they're kind of not to the cutting edge now anyway.
Yes. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, and I'll give you an opinion, which is from a marginally informed person. You're a very informed person, albeit not necessarily specifically in this field of robotics, is the robotics piece. And so Elon with Tesla is pretty pumped about the Optimus robot, which is the humanoid robot. And he's suggesting that in, I think it's 15 years, that there'll be 1 billion of these things, sentient robots with moving arms and hands and eyes and that sort of thing, doing everything from cleaning our houses to removing wasp nests to cleaning factories to coding to every single possible job that you can imagine. I used to talk about the dull. So it's super boring, fruit sorting, for example, dirty, cleaning out sewer pipes, dangerous, high-rise buildings, power poles, chemical environments, etc., or dear, super expensive to get the human to do the job. You talk about the 4Ds, and I look at the robots and I think about a few things, and I compare it to the car versus the helicopter problem. Helicopters have been around for 70 odd years, give or take. Leonardo da Vinci famously designed one 500 years ago, but he probably didn't. But the working technology has been around for 70, 80 years. They remain incredibly expensive to buy and to maintain because there's precision of machinery that's involved. There is massive complexity in the instrumentation, and there's a lot of risk that's involved around this thing. And so to buy or to fly one is super, super expensive. A car, been around for a bit longer, but we've kind of worked out how to make these things pretty cheaply, pretty safely. And so you can buy a car for hundreds of dollars that will work. Probably won't work that well, but a $10,000 car will work perfectly well for a whole number of years. And so the degree of complexity between those two things is massively, massively different. And so I think about the humanoid robot as being like the helicopter. It's incredibly complex and like a very difficult thing to get right. And the cost of the things that are involved to get that right will, yes, they'll come down over time, but I'm not sure that they'll come down to the point where it's Elon was talking about 20,000 USD. Let's call it 50,000 Kiwi because I respect the hell out of Elon, but he's a great storyteller. Reality distortion field, a la Steve Jobs, is one of the key things that he's exceptional at doing. So let's call it 50,000 NZ dollars down the path. I'm just not sure if that's going to happen in the next kind of 3 to 5 years. He's talking the next 12 to 36 months.
Yeah.
But you're like way closer to this than I am, and I might be asking you a question which is outside of your lane, but you're more informed. So I'm curious on your view on that.
I do have a view. Actually, I'm working in robotics now. So I did this new sorter as CNs, but when I came back to do it, I said, well, I'll do it for 3 years, but I've done so much fruit sorting, I want to do something else. So now I'm doing like a little bit of CNs and mostly with a company in Scotland doing robotic packing. And it's got a robot arm and it's supplying the latest robot arms that you can just buy. And you can buy them pretty cheaply, but then there's a lot of machine vision to put along with that and complex software to make it work. Packing kind of in the fruit industry because it's like trays of fruit and stuff have to be packed. But I always thought at Compac that robots, there'll be some big company that would make robots more like cars where you mass produce them so much that they're cheaper to buy than a specialised machine. And if you're say a fruit packer, and sometimes you need some people stacking boxes and sometimes you need them sorting the fruit and sometimes you need them picking things up, getting that robot and actually just renting it for the period that you're busy, because that's the other thing, is they're not busy all year round. They can be very seasonal, is a great option, especially when the price drops below what it would cost you for a person.
Yes.
I think that could happen and is the way it's going to go. There's always that trade-off that a specialist machine can be more efficient for some things, like you don't walk everywhere because you can get in the car and that's more specialised. So, that's the analogy to a robot that walks. Well,
yes.
It's not going to get somewhere fast.
Yes.
So, but I think there is a scope to get it cheap enough that it'll be very interesting. Let's say that an employer will go, well, I can just rent a robot for a lesser price than hiring a person.
Yeah.
To do simple jobs and as the technology gets more sophisticated, you'll be able to teach them and have them do things. And I think if you look at cars, we used to joke at Compac that you can buy a car and it's much, much better engineering for the price compared to our machines.
Right.
Because they're producing in such volumes. So yes. I think the robots will more get like that.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting. Industrial robots have been around for probably 70 odd years. The automation revolution was the 1950s, and Japanese manufacturing was built off the back end of a reasonable amount of those things. Swing arms that would come in and then weld, spot weld, for example, and assembly plants and those sorts of things. So let me be really specific. Humanoid robots that we will have in our house, cooking our dinner and cleaning our house. Do you think that's going to be a thing in 5 to 10 years from the vantage point of knowing what you know now? And I'm not positioning you as an expert, but I'm curious on your answer.
I think the things take longer than we think. So 5 years, maybe not. 10, it's getting more likely. Yeah. I was thinking a good avenue, a good product for someone who's watching is slow robots. So maybe they're more cost effective, but you go to work and you leave your robot slowly sanding the deck, and maybe it's slower than you, but it's got all day.
Right.
Why not that? Cost effective.
Yes.
Easy on a job.
Yes.
That could happen.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I saw Elon talking the other day about I've got a broken wrist, and so I'm having to see a wrist and hand specialist to work your way through that. They don't just bung you in the health system and then throw a cast on. They give you a specialist from the outset, which is great. And I was talking to her about the complexities of the human hand based on what Elon said. And there is no more complex kind of part of the body because, my mum said, but what about the feet? And I said, well, you can't do this with your toes, right? You can't individually control different aspects. And then that kind of has to link to pressure points and sensations and all the different aspects of it. So it's an incredibly complex part of the body. We've covered a range of different topics here. I haven't probably touched on everything. Is there something which is kind of near and dear to your heart, or something which you wanted to share with the audience around that journey that you went through with Compac or subsequently with Science?
Maybe a little bit about the people, especially the shareholders, because they were kind of key. There was kind of 4 of us for a long time with different skills. So when I joined, Hamish had got another guy to be a shareholder, Dave, who was a customer, and he hired him about a year before and got him into the business as shareholder to be the sales director. And he was a great sales director, and he had basically those complementary skills. Hamish can be quite good at selling, but doesn't love doing it, being on the road, whereas Dave loves doing it and is quite technical for someone who's a sales guy, very technical and can understand the machines. So that was very key, having a shareholder who could do that. Gavin had already been in the business a long time, had a small shareholding, really good at the electronics and technical stuff, and just generally really good at solving problems. He ended up running service and operations. And they got me to come along. They weren't so good at developing their software, and I think having me come along kind of fitted another piece in the puzzle. So it was quite a good team. We solved things. But I learned a lot too. I was thinking about what I learned from Hamish. I learned a lot about negotiation. I learned from him to be more extreme. So I remember one time early on, he went to Europe because it was a European competitor. And they were about the same size of us, but they had been losing money, and the family that owned them owned lots of companies and wanted to get rid of this one. So I thought, he's going to go make a deal, kind of similar size, but they're losing money. Maybe we're close. And he comes back and he said, I made a deal. We will merge and we will own 90% and they will own 10% and they will lend us 5 million euros. It's like, that's a crazy deal compared to 2 companies that are similar size. And I just learned from him, you be more extreme. You don't know what they're about. They just might want to get rid of it. But that deal fell through in the end. I think they realized it was maybe too good a deal for us. So I learned that from him. I also learned he was really annoying if you went to him, I had a problem. You would have you tried doing this, or if you tried doing this, or tried doing this. And so really developed the skill of thinking through all those things before I'd go talk to him, because it was embarrassing. He said, we tried this. And he'd be like, I didn't try that. And I think it's a great skill of really thinking of all the different ways you could solve a problem. That was usually good. He was quite a risk taker. Always just kept, Compac hardly took any money. We just kept gambling on getting bigger and bigger. He said, he always would say, it's like you go to the casino and just keep putting the money on black every year and keep putting it back in the business. It's funny. So a good group of people. And, recruitment, I think, was a big part, as I talked about before, getting the right people. And we were big on, I don't know if the word's lost us a bit, but people that have been there a long time, we valued by their experience and knowledge and what they could bring.
Yeah. Number of points you touched on there. So diversity of shareholding base, which brings different opinions, different ways to approach things, and different skill sets as well. Yeah. So that's one. Having the ability to circle around a problem effectively and ask, is this the actual root cause of the problem, or is this a symptom of the problem? So first order thinking is one of the things you talked about. So first principles is a really helpful skill to be able to have. And then I believe this is like, if you aren't, as a founder, as a CEO, at least a competent recruiter, you're not going to succeed in business. And ideally, it should be one of your superpowers in business, because the people are going to be bringing the vision that you've got to life for the business, certainly for the foreseeable future. But even if we get to the stage of the machines doing a lot more than they are today, you still have to have people to guide those machines, which comes down to a recruitment problem again. Yeah. And so being able to clearly understand where someone fits into the organisation chart, the sets of skills that go well together, understanding how a team could be formed and the interaction between those different team members, and then being able to identify them effectively through conversation, through a dialogue, and then, drilling down, and then pushing people through that conversation, a la an interview process and a recruitment process, is just such an invaluable skill to develop over time.
Yeah.
I think, selling is critical, having a modicum of technical understanding is critical, being able to do the visionary kind of thing and paint a picture. But if you take recruitment away, if you're a hopeless recruiter as a CEO, that's going to be an Achilles for you that'll really get in your way.
Yeah. What I would add to that, Hamish was a bit of a hopeless recruiter, actually.
Interesting.
He was great at knowing who was good, but he didn't really have the discipline to do all that work associated. So he would often steal who was there. What we ended up having was hiring someone to run HR who was really good at that and really helped us build that team so that they could help me get more people, really good people. And then Hamish occasionally would steal them for, they're really good. They can do this over here.
Right.
So
yes.
You don't necessarily have to do it yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
It is very important that it is.
So have someone in the business that's super effective at doing it, but you've probably had to have been either good or lucky at the start to have gotten the people that you can then task with doing that down the path. Yeah. I'm really pleased that we've been able to tell the story today, Nigel. Hamish, we might get on the show one day. He's a bit of a shy, retiring kind of guy behind the scenes, and so
you know what he said though when I asked him a while ago. I said, "Oh, why don't you come on this show and talk about?" And he said, "Oh, maybe when I'm a bit more successful."
Classic.
Kind of sums him up, really.
Yeah, to a T. I'm not sure if he's still on there, but for a while he was featured on the New Zealand Rich List. So I think they saw the total exit number as opposed to knowing what the context of the deal was. When I'm a bit more successful, that demonstrates the humility of him classically. Last time I saw him, he'd been up in his property in Northland, and he was literally wearing his jumper with all the straw and a bit of hay and grass on his knuckles and all sorts of things. So he looks, he fronts as a guy, and this is, I'm not denigrating him as a character because he's a very, very smart man, but he fronts as one of those guys that doesn't know and is a bit rough around the edges, and you have to scratch the surface a little bit to realise that he's actually super, super smart and very competent. I reckon that's a clever way to present yourself, though, rather than the person who looks as if they know everything, do it the other way around. Yeah. Because then people will treat you as if you don't know, and then you can outsmart them, essentially.
Yep.
Okay. There's an alternate universe, Nigel. Yeah. I might know the answer to this question, so I'm going to ask you the question, and then I'm going to guess what it is, and then you'll tell me what the real answer is. But there's another Nigel Beach in this alternate universe. He's got a different career. It's not the engineer, leader, entrepreneur kind of space. He's a different person, and he's got this deeply, deeply satisfying career.
Yeah.
What is that career? Can I guess before you say what the answer really is?
Yeah.
Jazz guitarist.
Yeah, pretty close.
Pretty close. Okay. Okay. Cool. Yeah.
I'm trying to do more music again. I've always done music. My brother's a music teacher. My brothers did a lot of music as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
So would it be musician?
Yep.
Professional musician.
Yeah.
Hey, nailed it. Excellent. Yeah, love it. Really grateful that you came on to the show today. Thanks for sharing your insight, picking the deal apart, the trials and tribulations, and I wish you all the best with science as you move ahead from here.
Yeah, thanks.
Cool.
Okay.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed it, and if you've gotten this far, you definitely have, then I reckon you should go and check out a copy of my book. It's available on my website or Amazon.com. There's an Audible version as well. And it's a blend of personal insight and experience on what it takes to build and sell a company. It's not a how-to guide. You can go to ChatGPT for that. I've had some wonderful unsolicited feedback from people, but I did ask some folk for it, and here is one of the bits of feedback that has come from one of the early readers. Josh has created something rare, a guide that's both deeply practical and genuinely wise. His writing is punchy, clear, and feels like sitting across the table from someone who's been through it all and knows exactly what you need to hear. This is the resource every founder needs when facing the biggest decision of their professional life. Honest, actionable, and completely grounded in reality. That's from Susie McAlpine, who is herself a best-selling author and a speaker and business advisor. Please go check out a copy available on the website. Thanks for listening.